In 1996, I began working at the Lynn and Lewis Wolfson II Florida Moving Image Archives, a film and video collection housed at Miami-Dade College in Miami, Florida, where I am currently the archives manager. My first few years at the Wolfson Archives involved a lot of hands-on training on how to handle analog film and videotape materials. It wasn't until about 5 years ago that digitizing the entire film and video collection became a reality for the archives, which now includes the institutional college archives of Miami-Dade College and its myriad of documents, photographs, printed materials, as well as videotapes in various formats. In the past 4 years, the Wolfson and college archives have grown to include digital materials, digitized and born digital. Because of the inclusion of the college archives and because of the huge demand for digital materials, I needed to update my education with regards to managing archival records, photographic materials, and digital collections, to have a more formal knowledge about archival history, standards, and best practices so that I can ensure we are properly caring for our materials and following accepted archival standards. Since I had been away from a learning environment for a long time, the online learning tools and strategies for success was a great primer. Learning how to use Blackboard, Collaborate, and Canvas to communicate and interact was not nearly as daunting as I was thinking it would be before I completed this introductory course. Did I have any notion that the development of today's official repositories has its roots in the years following the French Revolution and the desire for government agencies, such as the National Assembly for the French, to be held accountable to the people via the saving of official records and documents? Not really, but I do now. By 1800, France's archives were firmly established. By the late 1890s, the United States was on its way to creating an official public archives, which it finally did in 1934 with a bill passed to establish the National Archives. Concepts put forth by T.R. Schellenberg, Oliver Holmes, and the National Archives resulted in more structure and an expansion of archival practices. What I used to call accessioning, meaning adding an item to the collection via a unique accession number and database record, is just one part of records management. First there's appraisal, then accessioning, followed by processing, which involves archival arrangement and description. Green and Meisner advocated more product, less process in 2005 to deal with huge backlogs of collections waiting for detailed processing. It's a concept that something is better than nothing without consideration for the quality of that something. This is a bit controversial for moving image archives that rely on detailed descriptions to find specific images. So I can't really implement that edict with that part of the collection, but it is possible for the paper records and photographs, as container lists seem to be adequate for the initial discovery of those documents. Describing archival materials seems to be the most time-consuming task that a collection is subjected to. Depending on the type of archival materials, there are many different standards that are used to create structure and allow for interoperability with other collections. The finding aid is a search tool that can connect repositories when formatted in the encoded archival description metadata schema. As my research paper for the metadata class with Mary Bolin, I evaluated whether EAD finding aids were still necessary now that many collections have been digitized and are accessible online. What I found was that finding aids, or collection profiles, depending on what the repository chooses to call them, are still useful for discovery as long as they link to any digitized materials listed on the finding aid. One of my current projects at the archives is converting our collection profiles into more detailed finding aids that can easily be formatted in EAD. Even after having worked for many years in an archive, I had never thought deeply about what preservation means and how it relates to digital collections. The Open Archival Information System reference model and digital asset management systems were introduced in detail via the Preservation Management course. In moving image preservation, damaged files and videotapes are cleaned and repaired, then reels and tapes are digitized by capturing via a film scanner or video ingest system that combines legacy analog equipment with digital technology. Digital masters and surrogates are then redundantly saved. The resultant access files are utilized by users for any number of reasons and need to have long-term accessibility. There are other considerations that need to be taken into account, especially when dealing with digital files and how they can be viewed or represented over time. For this class with Dr. Catherine Skinner, I examined whether system emulation or file migration was a better long-term preservation strategy. Based on my research, I concluded that migration was the more feasible strategy because it does not rely on a highly technical staff to maintain and operate equipment, and the results of migrating to another format are sufficient for the needs of the designated community of users in most cases. With our collection containing thousands upon thousands of photographic negatives, slides, and prints in the college archives, it was imperative that I learn how to preserve those images. I also needed to understand how the images deteriorate with silver particles decaying and color dyes fading. Knowing this about photographs also applies to moving image films because the composition of still photo film and moving image films are very similar. Introduced early on in the photographic preservation class, the Graphics Atlas web resource from the Image Permanence Institute has come in handy for identifying and figuring out the conservation needs and deterioration habits of some of the older still photographs in our college archives. The digital curation class has turned out to be the culmination of everything I have learned in the program. It allowed for an actual real-world situation of developing a digital curation plan for a collection containing analog and digital photographs. Even better that it was a recent collection donated to both the Wolfson Archives and the Museum of Art and Design, also at Miami-Dade College, with the archives as the managing repository of the collection. This group project resulted in recommendations for this collection that detailed a digital asset management system, metadata schema, consortia sites to connect to via a finding aid, and digital preservation strategies. From creation to long-term preservation, digital curation manages all aspects of a digital object's life cycle. Curation serves to enhance and ensure the extended value of data and to maintain authenticity and integrity of the data set. With more and more items coming into the Wolfson and College archives as digital files, knowing how to implement curation strategies and standards helps the materials remain viable and accessible. From moving images to documents to digital files, my ability to maintain and preserve these materials has exponentially improved now that I know what I need to be concerned with and the best way to manage these concepts to benefit the long-term preservation and accessibility of the collections held at the Wolfson and College archives. No longer am I dealing with one type of materials, specifically moving images. What would be considered more traditional archival materials are now a part of the collection I manage. This was the motivation for enrolling in the Postmaster's program. As our collection has evolved from film and video, my knowledge base needed to also evolve. All of the courses I've taken have contributed to my ability to make decisions that are better informed. With the various preservation grant applications that I will now be involved with, I can articulate the needs of the collections using proper language and write more appropriate narratives and statements of purpose. This is something I wasn't very confident with before, but out of financial necessity for the collection, it's something I need to be able to do. Thanks to the courses I've taken in the Postmaster's Certificate program, I'm also able to relate information to archive staff in a professional way that teaches them the current standard practices and policies relating to archives, preservation, and more broadly, digital curation.